Hey everyone, Zach here, and I am here to discuss the BOKEH. And you can say or call the BOKEH whatever you want: bokeh, 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 BOKEH. We always said it BOKEH in film school, so that's what's kind of ingrained. Originally, when I started the BOKEH project in 2019, I was like, man, I want this headphone to be between like $599 and $799. Obviously now it's about 5 years later, and the price, list price is going to be $1099, which is higher than that. You know, a lot of things have happened since then, but you know, I am pretty proud that we're able to offer it $1099, which is the same price as the Atticus was released at in 2016. And so a lot of that work went into just figuring out how to make a headphone out of wood, metal, and leather with the hand processes we do and all the CNC machines and everything that just goes into the headphone. Which one interesting fact is that the baffle's made of Richlite. If you look really close here, this baffle is Richlite on top, and then you see a little thin line towards the back, and that's actually bamboo on the back that makes up the other part of the baffle. If it was just completely Richlite, the baffle would be like really heavy. This is the same material they use on like the fretboard of guitars because of how dense that Richlite part of it is. But the bamboo is what allows us to get that right density that's almost the exact same as the sapele wood that we use for the baffles for the other headphones. We also wanted to get a chassis that we weren't assembling completely from scratch in-house. And so this is a chassis that is pre-built out of house, but made completely from metal and from other materials. And we made sure that it's completely modular and that we can easily replace any of the parts. It is a little actually more complicated and slightly less modular because of the slight amount of greater parts in it than our other chassis. But given that, you know, the parts are a little less expensive if they have to be replaced, and they are all fully user replaceable if need be. Having the Atrium damping system in this headphone is a really important part about how it sounds. And I think about, you know, why closed ZMF headphones sound how they do. And you saw that first in the Atrium Open, and then the Atrium Closed, and then, you know, our Otor Classic, Caldera, and now the BOKEH. And you can definitely go online. You'll go to the website, go to product info, and you can go to Atrium Acoustic Design, and that'll bring up the story of how I came up with the Atrium damping system and what it kind of is and what it does. But, you know, the quick short of it is that it's a, you know, malleable system, allows me to tune the headphones and each headphone system open or closed to what I find to be the best innate properties that sound the best for you, me, the listener, as we listen to the headphones. So the other thing that's worth talking about with the BOKEH is just that this liquid crystal polymer, or LCP for short, driver is 80 ohms. And you may ask, hey, why did you want to make a lower impedance headphone? Isn't ZMF known for high impedance dynamic drivers? And the answer is just that the damping factor I learned through testing a bunch of different drivers that we designed, it can't always be the same for each different material. And I found myself traveling more as time went on, going to more can jams, going to more events and whatnot, and having a lower impedance driver that still scaled with amps and was easier to drive became more important because, you know, I've noticed more people own DAPs. I own a bunch of DAPs now. I'm traveling more. I want to be able to plug something in and be able to get to its maximum performance a little easier. And that's really the main benefit of a low impedance driver, is that while it may not scale quite as much as a 300 ohm driver with your, you know, pricier and better gear, it will still scale quite a bit with that 80 ohm impedance. And what you'll find is that you can run it out of like a laptop or a dongle. it's interesting. I found the lighter liquid crystal polymer material. It's a really thin membrane that really kind of has a very light weight to it. It worked better with a lighter voice coil like the 80 ohms, whereas I found the beryllium drivers and the biocellulose drivers we use that have a thicker, heavier membrane and a little bit heavier rubber surround kind of do better with a heavier, longer winding of that voice coil, which leads to the higher impedance. And so this driver I've really found is optimized both in materials and impedance to what sounds best with it. One thing that I think some of you might know, but is worth mentioning, is that I do in the R&D process utilize, a 5128, and then also I have here, the 711 coupler, which is the standard from which Harman was tuned. The tuning is something that took me quite a while to get right, and one thing I found with the lighter voice coil, everything is very sensitive within the damping system. We're going to go ahead and use that 711 coupler, which is the correct coupler to use to compare to the Harman target curve, and I find that I think a lot of you will be very happy to see that this headphone is tuned a little closer to Harman than other ZMFs. And it's not that with the Bokeh I set out to say, hey, this has to be tuned towards the Harman target. It's that my personal approach to tuning headphones is that every headphone driver, system, open, closed, semi-open, will have an innate tuning that works best for the driver and for, of course, different subjective preferences, which you should definitely watch our video on the Bokeh tuning system that includes the 3 different pads and the 2 different Titan meshes to make sure that you make sure to try the different pads and the different meshes to tune it to your personal preference. But that being said, there are versions of the Bokeh that for those of you who are into the Harman tuning or know that your personal HRTF is closer to the Harman target, that there are good options for that. While there's also options to make it a little brighter than Harman and of course darker than Harman. My preference is of course to be a little below Harman in those upper mids, but I do find with dynamic drivers you can get semi close to Harman for my preferences and be okay. But anyways, let's dive into measurements real quick. And that's just one of these things where this is my favorite pad. It's probably the closest to the Harman target. That is a coincidence. I did not plan to say, oh, I like the one that's closer to Harman target the best. I definitely have found that the lower impedance drivers do seem to work a little better, at least in my experience so far with the Harman target curve. As far as dynamic drivers are concerned, does that mean it's always going to be correct that way? Definitely not, because there's so many factors in play. My preference is to, of course, as I mentioned earlier, be a little lower than a Harman target in this area. I just like a little smoother sound. Let's go ahead, and this is my personal set with Carina or the Limbawood, just no stain, like the claret stain here with this stock model. The suede I typically find has the most linear damped sound. Gonna take in and out. So here's the suede pads. You can see the suede pads even adhere a little more than a Harman target. A little bit of a peak in here with the suede pads. This is part of that Bokeh tuning system. If you want, you can go ahead and put your solid mesh in there. So here we go. So you'll see this kind of thinner line is with the solid mesh in place, thicker line there without it in place. So you can pretty easily see the difference here between the two. So this is suede, perforated mesh, solid mesh. Again, there's no right or wrong, but of course, if you have your Harman target up, you're always going to think you need to match it as close as possible. So, and that's one thing about the Bokeh, is that twisting the pad, for any of you guys who are out there measuring, it's going to change. You know, you can see between my two measurements, this was just a slight twist of the pad. So see how much, you know, up that brought, you know, the measurement. So definitely play around with it, because the driver is offset from the center of the baffle. And I can show you this real quick on this stock version. So because the driver is offset a little bit, if you're measuring this headphone, any reviewers or anyone out here who gets this, definitely play around with the placement of that. When you put it on your head, it really settles into place where, you know, we made sure that your ear is where the center of the driver is placed, but that can be harder when you're putting it on a measurement rig. So definitely play around with that as you're measuring, and the twisting of the pad, because it is very sensitive, that because of you know, the way the headphone was designed, whereas it'll just sit in place and you'll more like intuitively do it when you're putting it on as a person. But you know, you are not your own measurement rig. So when you put it on the rig, definitely play around with those placements. And then let's go back to the protein pads, which is the stock pad, and look at the stock configuration before we close this video out. So as far as putting the pads on, as I've always shown you guys, inside out, find your seam, and then the seam is gonna face the jack on this headphone. So seam facing the jack here. That's where the seam is lined up. And then I kind of like to do my little lobster claws, hands close to the body. Easiest way to put ear pads on. Keep the hands close to the body. You got more control, and it keeps the pad happy. All right, now we're good to go. All right, so you're gonna get this quick start guide. I've got my recommended recipes here. There's another video about the tuning of the bokeh and the bokeh tuning system and how to take the mesh on and off and all that stuff. Definitely go watch that video where we used a 5128 coupler. But in this one, we're using the 711 coupler to more go towards the Harman stuff. And so yeah, let's get this baseline measurement with no mesh and the protein pads. Definitely the most V-shaped or U-shaped of all the tunings. And then you'll find, you know, as you put the different meshes in, I'm gonna go ahead and put the stock perforated mesh in real quick. And you can quickly see between the two here that the perforated mesh is damped a little bit. You can see that peak came down a little bit. The Titan mesh, as you call it, will damp those treble peaks a little bit. That kind of concludes this introductory video on the bokeh. There's a lot more other stuff to go through. Any questions or suggestions on things you want to know about the bokeh, definitely leave those comments below, and I'll make sure to try to go through them. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll check you guys later.